Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in the United States!
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Ron Jansen. I've been waiting for this one for a long time. Welcome, Ron. As you know, we know each other. I've read your book. I've seen other podcasts. We have a relationship. We've communicated while you were writing your book. We have an author, helper, and common and all that. So anyway, before I keep blathering on, thanks so much for showing up. I know you got a lot to add to this podcast. So with that, tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Mike. I'm excited about this too. I really appreciate what you're doing and the chance to join you today. So, my origin story, that's a very mythical way of asking the question. But I was born in West Michigan, a small town called Dorr. I think when I was first, I remember as a kid, it was a big deal when we got a blinking stoplight at the center of town because for a long time it was 4 stop signs that stopped traffic in every direction. So I was raised there, grew up somewhat out in the country, 20 minutes from Grand Rapids or so. I gravitated towards sports, really loved baseball was my first love. Football came a few years after that. And football is the one I really stuck with through high school. And then a few years after. So I joined I played a couple years of football in community college. I had big aspirations of going further than that, but I was an offensive lineman and didn't have the hands to catch the ball and move to a different position, and didn't have the size to stay on the offensive line. So, actually, my second year of community college, that was September 11, 2001. I was on the football team. I was actually working part-time at the time. So I remember I was on a construction site when we started hearing the news of the towers being hit and everything. And shortly after that, within 30 days or so, I enlisted. I went to the Marine recruiting office and enlisted from there, and then I finished my second year of school, and then went to boot camp the following summer out in San Diego. And then, so that was the summer of 2002, School of Infantry after that. And then not long after, I guess I should mention I was a reservist. So I joined the reserves. The idea was after School of Infantry, I come back home to Grand Rapids and then start the training here. And then shortly, I don't know, a month or two after returning, we got activated for my first deployment. That time we went to Djibouti in East Africa in early 2003 through I think August 2003. And then I did deploy a second time to Iraq in 2006 to 2007. Outside of that, I'm married, got 4 great kids. My oldest one is a senior in high school this year. So I'm starting to think through college plans and all this sort of stuff I didn't really do when I was that age. So it's exciting and terrifying, and that's kind of where I'm at today.
Oh, well, this podcast, as you know, is all about, I call it the Combat Leadership Podcast, but we're going to have people on here who weren't necessarily, leaders and all of that. But I believe you were. So tell us specifically, what units did you serve with in combat? Where did you serve in combat? And what roles did you serve throughout your combat tours?
Sure. So I was part of Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. So 124 based in Michigan, and the different reserve companies are scattered around the state. And my first deployment went to Djibouti. We received combat pay, but there was no combat to be found around there. It was just guarding a base there. But my second deployment, that was when we went to Iraq. We were stationed in and around Fallujah. 2000, and we got there in about September 2006. And at that point, I was promoted right before we deployed to squad leader. So I acted as a squad leader. I was part of the weapons platoon. I'm an 0351 assaultman, and so we had mortarmen, machine gunners as an assaultman in that platoon. But because of at the time, it was a counterinsurgency mission. We were broken basically into rifle squads. So I was responsible for a squad of 13 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman that had a mix of mortarmen, assaultmen, and machine gunners. We patrolled and operated as a rifle squad, but we carried the heavier weapons most of the time, just to improve our firepower as well.
Rank were you when you were a squad leader?
I was a corporal then.
Okay, yeah, I love it. It. Yeah, I mean, as you know, you're aware of lance corporals, squad leaders, and so that might be one of the first lessons for some of the younger folks, especially maybe the staff NCOs and officers, young officers, is, your officers are at the basic school and they're thinking, I'm going to get a staff sergeant, 3 sergeants, and I know the squads and fire teams have changed since my day. I think there's only 2 beefed up fire teams now, but my point is, I went to, Grenada Beirut deployment, and 2 of my squad leaders were corporals. One was a sergeant. One got promoted to sergeant, but the other one was a corporal, and I don't think he ever got promoted during his enlistment. He just left. He was great. And so I had lance corporal fire team leaders, and those guys were great,
Right.
So you played a hand you're dealt with, so to speak,
Right. You've got a certain number and outfit of people, and you got to make it work. And it was a little bit interesting. Yeah, I would think with us, maybe the majority of the squad leaders were sergeants, but there was maybe at least a third of us were corporals. Yes, when it came to fire teams, there were a lot of lance corporals and corporals that led those, and that's what we had.
Well, I love it. You know my background. I did some enlisted time as well, and my 1st battalion commander as an officer was a real legend, referred to as one of the best combat leaders. His name was Ray Smith, and he retired as a major general, but as a battalion commander, he told us all repeatedly, the most important person in this battalion is a squad leader. Squad leaders, squad leaders, squad leaders, squad leaders. And this guy saw heavy combat.
Right.
Took over a rifle company in Hue City as a 2nd lieutenant. And then kept that company for the rest of his tour. Navy Cross, Silver Stars. I mean, total deal, And I never forgot that. And having been a corporal and a sergeant, I was an officer that loved NCOs, made no difference in what I expected from them than officers, character, integrity-wise, and effort. And I believe, there's nothing a Marine sergeant can't do if he's enabled and equipped right. Those guys won't let you down, and you were one. You know what I mean? They just, Dale Carnegie, the famous old leadership guy, said, "Give a man a reputation to live up to." And so I know that when they put you in charge of that squad, if you're like me, had a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, man, am I going to be able to do this? And of course you did, but you were willing to die instead of failing. You weren't going to fail. You know what I mean? You were going to go. And I love that. And I think that's what keeps the Marine Corps and probably most services together, at the pointy end of the spear. So I got to say, before we get going, some standard questions that I always ask is, if you had to limit 2, 3, 4 short answers, executive summary, so to speak, of your philosophy of combat leadership at any level, whether it's a fire team leader, squad leader, captain, or whatever. What is your basic combat leadership philosophy?
Sure. Yeah, I had to think about that a little bit in preparation for this. I would say, one, it probably all will sound cliche, but you need to lead from the front. You can't stay far enough back to keep yourself safe while your men are out there. And I think that goes for any level, but especially at the squad, it's just not practical at all. I think the other thing is there's just so much interconnection between the members. If you think of the members of a squad and back and forth, that you really, really need to make sure everybody's comfortable with each other, communication, operating tempo, that sort of thing. Those are the main things. And I think maybe another, I don't know if it's a principle, it's more just a observation. It's just the next levels in leadership above you are incredibly important and critically important, because they're the ones, you're looking at your squad and the 3 fire teams there, but they're looking at a platoon and the 3 squads there, or they're looking at the company level and the 4 platoons there. And all of that needs to, you need strong leaders at each of those levels in order to really execute well.
Yeah. Well, Ron, I want to ask you this, I find that most effective combat leaders that I've known or served with or studied or observed, or I'm made aware of, most of them will say, no, I really fell under the mentorship of a real mentor and coach, and these guys helped me out. They saw something in me. They took me under their wing. Was that your case? And if so, who were they? What'd they do?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So to start was with my platoon commander when we deployed to Iraq. His name was Jeremy Hoffman. He was a captain at the time, which is a little bit, it's a higher rank for a platoon commander. But that's how it worked out in the reserves a lot of times. But he was a Naval Academy graduate. I think he graduated around 2000, and we were in Iraq in 2006. So, and he had deployed twice to Iraq already before that, once in the initial invasion and then once with another reserve battalion in 2004 to 2005 timeframe. So he had a tremendous amount of experience, which I did not have at that point, just from the more formal military educational background at the Naval Academy, but also 2 tours in Iraq where I was at just in East Africa the first time. So he was one of the it was an interesting guy. He looked like he was about 15 years old. He just looked very young. He was a smaller guy. I'm 6'3", 225 pounds. Like I was much larger, but he had like that level of intensity and drive that that just sets people apart, and competitive spirit. I mean, he had the classic temperaments of a Marine officer. And so it seemed like we were a bit of an odd couple, but I really usually appreciated how he drove us and got us ready for training. And it was almost made it, that's part of the reason why I said what I said earlier about the levels above you, because then as a squad leader, I was translating his orders. I was taking what he taught, but then also a lot of it was just, I could pass it on to the squad that I was responsible for, rather than trying to, make up for a poor leader above. And then another person I would mention, just as I think somebody I really admire and look up to, is our company commander. At the time, he was a major. His name was Dan Wisnat, and he was, I think, like yourself, he started out on the enlisted side and then went to become an officer. And he had also been to Iraq twice before that. So just had a wealth of knowledge, came from I think the deployment before, he was in intelligence. And so he was really well equipped to help us understand the importance of intelligence, especially with counterinsurgency, understanding the different tribal dynamics, all those sorts of things. So those are 2 people I would definitely call out there.
Yeah. Well, in addition to those, did you have any role models? And I define a role model as they don't even have to be alive. Like Teddy Roosevelt was one of my boyhood, and still to this day, he's the man, and obviously he was long gone by the time I was born. So did you have any role models that also contributed to your development?
Sure. Yeah. As I think about people that I just had a deep amount of respect for, Abraham Lincoln was one. I know I read several of his books, or not his books, but books about him, and just the amount of failure and resistance he faced in his entire life, and just difficulty, but also came to a point where, he was making really important decisions on behalf of our country, and really just respected how he handled that. And then another one was Ulysses S. Grant. So General Grant, I read his memoirs it was definitely before I went to Iraq, but sometime probably not too long before. And it was really interesting because if you've read a lot of, especially combat memoirs by, the general class, or people that are higher political positions and everything, they're usually it's a chest thumping exercise, and there'll be a little modesty thrown in there, humility, but it's usually a chance to prove that they did everything right and everybody else are idiots. And if you read General Grant's memoirs, and I think they were kind of ghost written by Mark Twain, is what I've heard, which makes it even better because he's a great writer. If you read his memoirs, he's very honest about what happened and the times where he really screwed up and where he, made a mistake, or where he, it wasn't just settling old scores. It was just being, talking about the different campaigns, but also he was a part of so many important battles and the final conclusion of the Civil War. Those are people that I really admired and just respected for their ability to, deal with the hard issues, whether they're political, military, or whatever it was, and just keep a steady course regardless.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanted to know, by the way, I wanted to mention this. I am aware, obviously, I mentioned it before, that you wrote a book. Mm-hmm. And we had already talked about this, and you're going to come back on and do a dedicated episode for the book. But in a nutshell, what's the title of the book? What's the topic? Why did you write it, and who's it aimed for?
Sure. So the title of the book is called An Otherwise Healthy Person. And then the subtitle is A Marine Story of Going to Fallujah and Then Fighting to Come Home. So the title, or the topic, as you can guess from the title, is mostly my experience as a squad leader when I was deployed to Fallujah in 2006 and 2007. That was about the first 2/3 of the book. So it really goes through, it's my recollection of the things you went through, and I've gotten some affirmation from other guys that were there who have read it. But we all remember different events differently, or I remember some events really well, and other people say, yeah, I do recall that, but they can recount other things that I don't really have much memory of. But I think the first 2/3 of it are that experience. And then I was hopeful to be done at that point. I shared it with a few people I know and who know more of my story. And they said, okay, well, what happened after that? And it really hit me hard, because I did not want to write about, coming home and adjusting to life and working through things with my wife. And we had a lot of challenge we had to work through. So, but the last third is that portion. And it's been out for about a year now. I've gotten some pretty good feedback from others who have served. A lot of people who have served around the same time or were, over in Iraq around the same time. And pretty uniformly, they said, hey, I liked it, but I really liked the last part where you talk about you're just real and honest about the struggles you had. And that was harder for me to write, but I think it was the right thing for me to do as well, because it put it in perspective for me, even just having to really commit to understanding that and I think the first audience that I had in mind when I started writing was just myself. And then if anybody else reads it, great, because I needed to figure it out more than anybody else did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to ask you, I ask everybody that comes on, there's two schools of thought on this. The question is there a difference, and you've done both, between just general peacetime garrison leadership and combat leadership? And I've heard highly qualified people say no difference whatsoever. It's the same stuff. And I've heard others say entirely different. I mean, there's no, it's apples and oranges. And
Right.
I think the truth, probably my answer would be somewhere in between that. But I want to hear your thoughts, because I'll tell you why, Ron. I think I was one of those young guys. I mean, when I came in the Marine Corps, there were World War II guys, Korea guys, and a ton of Vietnam vets. And I honestly thought, man, you get in combat. I mean, I just thought it was like, forget this stuff. You got to be now like Superman. And throw that out. Now you got to be like, I don't know what you want to be, but of course that wasn't true, And so I want to talk to the young folks that haven't been there yet. They might actually be serving in uniform right now, and better than most. You never know when you're going to go. They may be in combat 6 months from now. What would you tell them? Like, no, don't. To use the old saying, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
It's different. So anyway, what's your answer on this?
Well, I hate, this sounds like a cop out, but I would say it's pretty similar to your answer. It's both, or it's in between. I think there are maybe some elements of combat leadership that don't overlap at all with garrison leadership or leadership in the rear. But almost, the broad majority of it does. And I think, as I was thinking about this, there's a level of discipline that's required in order to maintain really high standards in garrison, whatever it is, whether it's uniform, whether it's just protocols, that sort of thing. And that can be taken too far. I mean, if you're, familiar with the Band of Brothers series, it's Captain Sobel at the start, who's just, he's the classic caricature of the leader who takes some things too far in preparing for combat, to the point where it's a distraction from the mission. And so as I think back to my time in Iraq, even, there were times we'd go to some of the bigger bases and we'd get hassled going to the chow hall because we got dirty camis on or haven't had a haircut in a month. And it's like, hey, listen, we haven't left our FOB and our area of operations. We haven't left there in a month. This is our first time coming. We're going to get chow and we're going to go get haircuts and hopefully call home because we have crappy phones, where we're at. And so I think it can overlap. And what's tough is that some of the worst leaders focus the most on the trivial things, but I think really good leaders need to focus on those things too, but in a different way and with a different mindset. So, that's sort of a cop out. I'm not really answering your question, but that was my experience.
You are answering it, and we're gonna talk about that chow hall stuff. Dirty boots and haircut. We're gonna talk about that later. Suffice it to say, I've met those guys. I despise those guys.
Yeah.
And we'll talk. I don't want to steal our thunder on that one, but anyway, you're highly experienced. And not only were you a combat leader, you observed a bunch of them too, above you, to the side, and heard of some. And so I'm going to ask you a two-sided question. The first one is, are there any traits, personalities, characteristics, leadership styles that you find are common to most of the effective combat leaders you're aware of? Then I'm going to ask, all right, Ron, let's face it, there are ineffective, and that's being charitable. There are ineffective and even really bad combat leaders. Do they share some common characteristics too? So let's go with the good ones first.
Sure. As I think about the people I served with and what I tried to emulate, I think proactive is the word that comes to mind when I think about the best combat leaders is always willing. And I mean that very broadly, like always thinking about, okay, what is the challenge? How do we rise to that challenge and how do we meet it? Where is the enemy? How do we get there? What do we do? Always working and also, along with that is like, okay, we tried this, we tried to hit this objective, or we tried to do this. It didn't work. What do we do next? What's our next angle? How do we maneuver? And I think that, as I think really across the board, that was one of the most important traits. And the flip side of that, I think of those who are less effective is maybe like a passivity, not proactive, where it's just like, well, let's just see what happens, or let's just take a step back. And along with that, maybe not as passivity for like, it's not a laziness or a, or even, lack of willingness to get into action or anything, but more just like it's more like overanalyzing things. Like, especially in combat, there's a whole lot of things that are happening that are outside of your control. You don't fully understand. You've got ideas, but things constantly change. And I think the ones that I saw that struggled, they got into this phase of trying to analyze and fully understand what was going on before acting. And that just, you get stuck in a loop of everything is constantly changing so fast that you're not going to fully understand it or be able to really be effective then.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I'd say that mostly sums it up for me. So.
Okay. So did we cover good and bad to your satisfaction? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to see if you had any saved rounds, so to speak. So I want to ask another really, people are going to like, no kidding, Mike, but it begs, because I wasn't sure of the answer, do you think that anyone can become an effective combat leader? Maybe not, I'm going to use some big names here, maybe not Sergeant Major LeHue,
Sure.
Cross, maybe not Brad Castle, the guy in the famous, maybe not Sergeant Major Booker, who I've heard of as a first sergeant, Silver Star recipient. I've read his award and I've read his Marines, and this guy was doing the deal, Yeah. So, not like, in the old days, I'm dating myself, the Audie Murphy, like everybody, John Basilone, Right. I'm not talking about the Congressional Medal of Honor guys. I'm talking about effective. He got his squad, his platoon, the company. They were on target, and he risked the lives of his Marines appropriately, but he didn't gamble with them, and he was competent. He knew his trade, and he didn't send Marines on an objective if it could possibly be prepped. And he wouldn't send them at all if it didn't really need to be there. They go check that mountain. There's no reason to check that mountain. And on the way, 3 guys hit an IED and they're gone now, Yeah. For what? Because you on a whim, let's check, has no tactical significance. So I am blathering on. What's your take? Large or small? You're a big man. What about that? And they're out there, as you know. What about that 5'7", 135-pound infantry lance corporal, Yeah. Can he become one?
Yeah, well, I would say definitely in that case. Like I said, my platoon commander was a 5'7", 135-pound captain at the time. Or he would probably hit me. He'd probably say he's bigger than that, but it felt like he was about that size. So I would say, if we're talking about if we take the population of Marines, not people in general, but people who joined, voluntarily signed up for the Marines and went through training and everything, I would say most. I don't know if everybody can. I'm not sure that every single person or every single Marine, I think they can perform adequately in combat or effectively in combat. When it comes to leading a squad or a fire team or a platoon, there are some traits that aren't maybe universal. I just don't think they are. I mean, I think they, you know, you could take somebody who's relatively average and get them up to a pretty good level. I just don't know if everyone can, or to the extent that you were saying, where they'll make, you know, wise tactical decisions. And I include myself in this because I didn't always, you know, will make the right decisions consistently and you know, accomplish the mission without taking on unnecessary risk or adding other complications to it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And thanks for that, Ron. And I would just say this, we're going to talk a lot more about this, but can you give us a Cliff Notes version of, hey, you just said, yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is some people, just like regular leadership, some people seem to be born with more aptitude, like musical talent, math, sports, you know, some people just have it, but we all know that there are people playing in the NFL today that aren't supposed to be on that roster.
Oh,
sure. Speed-wise and sidewise, you know, makes it happen. And there's a ton of guys that were the ideal candidate, never even got drafted, you know, for whatever reason, you know. So for the people that born with or without aptitude, what's your Cliff Notes? How does somebody go about maximizing their chances of being an effective combat leader prior to going to combat? What can they do?
Sure. So I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but just reading everything you can and understanding what have the past fights and battles looked like. And I think one of the things that you'll see is that when you go look at a lot of the different campaigns in the military history, it's written by, you know, somebody who a very high rank or a historian who talked to people with very high ranks. Yeah. And so, and those views can be fascinating and interesting on their own. But I think finding, you know, getting to the lower levels, getting to the squad or the fire team level, or just somebody who was an assistant gunner at a fire team and finding out their experience, that will help inform what it looks like, and also understanding the next war we fight is not going to be the same one that we fought in Iraq or Afghanistan, or even if it's in those same countries, it's a different. There's different technology, there's different political climate, there's different, a lot of differences. So just understanding that, even given the full body of what you know going into a conflict, things will change, and you'll have to be able to adjust to what's going on the ground. It doesn't matter how much you knew or what you knew about the last conflict. Like the next one will be different and similar in some ways, but you won't know exactly until you get there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Here's some questions, Ron, I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to rattle them off and ask you to. I've certainly, you know, asked myself these questions, you know, and, you know, before I ever went. And you know, I was so surrounded by combat experience as a young Marine, and you were eventually, you know, you probably entered the Marine Corps with minimal combat experience around, but then at some point it was like World War II. I mean, you know, I mean, people are packed from all these deployments, you know, and so my point is this. Here's some questions that I think really everybody asks themselves if they're responsible and they want to do well. Will I be too afraid to perform well under fire? Will I remember what I'm supposed to do, or will I blank out like I've heard some guys do? Will I be able to see my friends killed and wounded? And if necessary, do I have what it takes to take a life? Like, can I shoot somebody point blank? It's me against him. You know? And some people can't do that. So, you know, you don't have to answer each question individually. You can, but just generally speaking, you know, did you have any of these questions, and how did you get around it? And now that you know what you know that you didn't know when you were asking these questions, what advice would you give the young folks out there that are asking questions like this? You know, am I going to be able to do this?
Yeah, no, and I think we all ask those questions to some extent, and probably a few of them are more prominent than others, depending on the person and depending on the situation. I would say I didn't. It's maybe a weird way of phrasing it. I didn't fear being afraid going into it for whatever reason. It might have been arrogance or ignorance, or I don't know. I just, but I did. The second thing you said is, was I worried or afraid that I wouldn't remember what I needed to do, or I wouldn't do what I needed to? Like, that was something that I thought about a lot. And it was about a month before we left the U.S. that I moved into the squad leader role. And at that point, I don't know if you've had this experience, Mike, but once I was worried about those 12 or 13 guys, I found a lot less time to worry about myself and what I was thinking. Like, I was more focused on them and what they needed and what they were going through and everything. So it wasn't, and that's where it came in. Like, am I going to perform well, that I'm going to, lead these guys well? And do I have, everything I need to do? Have I done everything? Am I going to remember everything that I need to? And so that was, I think, a really, that was a turning point for me when I was in a squad leadership position. When it came to like thinking about, the possibility of one of them getting killed or wounded or whatever, it was really just around, what do we need to do in order to minimize that risk? And it was, it's kind of funny to say minimizing the risk, because you're going into a combat zone and you're leaving the forward operating base every day and going out to where the enemy is, where it's relatively safe if you don't do all those things. But knowing that was what we had to do, it was something that constantly weighed on me. And I do remember there were times, and it wasn't, I sometimes I would be the one to go check something out if it was suspicious or whatever. And it wasn't because I was brave or anything. It was because I would rather have it be me than have it be one of them if something happened. And so, I think that drove a lot of what I did. And then when it came to like taking a life, it was, that's one thing I think the Marine Corps does pretty well is drill it in your head like, this is what you're here for. So I did have, maybe a few thoughts in the back of my head, but not a lot. I don't think I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I still don't today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those answers, but I want to throw an ad-lib question on that. That's, I sent you the outline, told you we could deviate. So that said, I want to talk about this because I'm chuckling, because in my experience, not only did I ever have to prod Marines to become appropriately violent, I realized pretty quickly that if it wasn't for solid NCO fire team leaders and that, an 18-year-old Marine, high school 18 months ago, left to his own devices, combat, I mean, they can be every bit as wantonly vicious as the bad guys.
Yeah,
we need guys. We need NCOs. There's not enough officers. There's not enough staff NCOs. We need squad leaders and fire team leaders to say, "Hey, whoa, no, we don't do that. Don't do that again."
No,
They raise their hands, drop their weapons.
Mm-hmm.
We don't keep your weapon on. Makes a move, we drill them. But other than that, we don't do that. We don't do what they would do to us. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that was, I would completely agree. Like, it's not there was no point where I questioned, like, hey, do I need to prod these guys to move forward or to bring the fight to the enemy? Like, it was happening. It was more of a, it was a control and optimize rather than push forward. As I also think about that, there's one of the guys that was in my squad. He still jokes with me. He's like, we would have won that war in an afternoon if you would have just taken the gloves off us. We could have gone out there. And I try to remind him, like, you would have ended up in the brig within, a couple days. But but I do think there's that, there's that just stepping in and having the understanding to say, okay, it's not intuitive at all. When someone's shooting at you, you're shooting at them, like you start to move in and take over. Like there's no intuitive switch that says, okay, stop, now pull it back, or dial it off, or stop shooting everything in sight. Like it's a deliberate, and once you've been through it a few times, you understand that, but it's got to be a deliberate pullback, or else it could get out of control quickly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's been my observations, and I've read a lot about it, talked to other people about this and all of that. You're absolutely right. But I'm going to make a statement and see what you think about it. You've already agreed. Oh, yeah, those pointy end of the spear, those fire team leaders and squad leaders, the senior leaders are counting on those guys to maintain that kind of control so that we're not in the evening news that night.
Right.
There's international incident, and someone's going to jail. A lot of younger guys don't realize you can go to jail for murder in a combat zone. Accidents will happen, but if it's ever proved that you shot someone that you had no business shooting, and it wasn't like a friendly fire or misidentification, you're in deep trouble from us, not the enemy. You're in deep trouble. So I say, if those NCOs, I'm going to use corporals and sergeants, knowing that there's lance corporals serving there too. If those guys are the backbone, the meat behind this, controlling the pit bulls, so to speak, and keeping them on a leash, when to run and when to pull back, the time to train those guys and make sure they're capable of doing that is well before you ever get in a combat zone. They have to know their role. That, hey, I've not been there either, but from what they've told me, you're going to be places where we can't see you, and you're it. You're the general officer in that point right there. And so, any thoughts on the importance of really training these people so they know when to put the leash on and when to take it off and when to pull it back?
Right. No, I would completely agree. And that's one of the things that, the two officers I mentioned earlier, Jeremy Hoffman and Dan Wisnett, they really, really pushed down to us to say, hey, this is not just a traditional conventional fight. It is that there will be firefights, there will be, an enemy trying to kill you, but it's also counterinsurgency, and the real prize in that is the local population. So if we just go shooting up the village every time something happens, or every time somebody takes a pot shot at us or whatever, we are going to be actively working against our mission and our goals in that area. And so we need to be very restrained, which sounds really hard, but I think what you said is right. We needed to talk about that before we ever got on a plane to go over there, because without understanding that, you just respond in the way that, they shot at me, I'm going to shoot at them with a lot more force and firepower, and we're going to go after them. That's part of it, but also it needs to be very, almost surgical, in the sense that you've got to be very cautious about any additional damage you might cause, because then, the people that we need on our side in order to really actually turn this around will be, dead set against us from the start.
Yeah, well said. Well, I want to talk about, we're going to get back to that Chow Hall, tyrant, I hate those guys. I've met them, know, and for those out there, we're talking about, I'm going to let you talk about it, Ron, but we're talking about the guy who's, for no fault of his own, his job does not go outside the wire, to use an Afghanistan or Iraq. You've got the fob, but however large or small it is or remote it is, but that guy's job doesn't require him to go out. So he's pretty clean, might even be working out. He's buff, haircut, kind of looks like he's back at Camp Lejeune or Pendleton, And then somehow he sees the Chow Hall is about to close. and he's in the chow hall. He might even be in charge of the chow hall, and he sees this ragtag band of filthy-looking guys. He's not even sure they're Marines. They are Marines. He identifies that. They're dirty. They got a beard like you've got right now, which is unauthorized. Hair, uniforms are filthy. You get my point. Where did these guys come from, these undisciplined savages? And instead of saying, wait a minute, I and all of these guys on this fob, we are here to support that guy.
Right, yeah.
That guy's been out there hooking and jabbing, risking his life. He's lost 35 pounds already. He's dehydrated, all the stuff.
Right, yep.
Come on in. Come on in and eat. We'll keep it open for you.
Yeah,
and all I ask is we're going to give you some brooms and swabs. Could you please clean up after you're done?
Right.
Not a combat leader, not a squad leader, you or anybody else would ever say, oh, we're not doing that. We're just going to, they would do it. But you run into those guys that say, go back and clean up, shave.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
But we haven't had a hot meal in 32 days and chow hall's closed in 15 minutes. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where we breed what I call combat Marines that will never again give any level of respect to a support guy that, obviously they call them REMFs, and we all know what that, REMF stands for. It's not flattering. And everybody that I know that thinks like that has had an experience with one of those chow hall tyrants.
Right.
I'll let you talk about that a little bit later, but here's the next question, a big one too, Ron. I'm going to ask you about discipline. And man, I've been on Reddit and Facebook groups, and this is a big one, especially for the sergeants and below. And why? Why the preoccupation in peacetime with showing up at formation on time? Everybody in the same PT uniform, haircuts, First sergeant told me when he was in Fallujah, nobody had haircuts, didn't matter, had zero effect on combat readiness.
Right.
Why are you in my ass about how my camis look and blah, 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 my haircut and all this? For generations, troops have referred to this as chicken shit. It doesn't matter in combat. And most people that are been around know it does matter. And I'm setting the stage here. What I've learned and truly believe is it has its place. And in my day, we had to shine boots and brass. There was a lot more to do. I'm not sad that Marines don't have to, you didn't have to shine boots and polish brass. I'm okay with that. I don't think that that's a new soft Marine Corps. But those peacetime things quickly do go by the wayside when you were out there. Beards, all that, you can't shower, to have no water. You're going to drink the water. You're not going to shave it. With it and all that. But that discipline about showing up on time, being in the right uniform, clean weapons and all that does transfer. Now it's like, have you brought enough batteries for the radio? Do you have the right crypto fills in? Are we on the right freaks? Are the headlamps on the vehicles taped out properly? You get do we spare microphones? All that stuff. Are the weapons, we're filthy, but are the weapons spotless? What do you mean you didn't bring a cleaning rod with you? Are you kidding me? That kind of stuff. And so I say it does have a purpose. And peacetime leaders should be relentless in enforcing those standards, but they need to explain why they're doing it. First of all, for peacetime Marines, there's no excuse for us not to shave and all of that. Secondly, I promise you, when you go to combat, a disciplined unit in the rear typically will be a pretty disciplined unit in combat. But you don't have a sloppy unit, and you've seen them, and I've heard about them. I've seen them. They don't all of a sudden get to the combat zone. All of a sudden, the combat genie hits them on the head like, you are now a disciplined unit. Ain't happening. And they're going to take more casualties and more KIAs than necessary because they're taking shortcuts. They're not disciplined. And so anyway, I'm blathering on. With that stage, what do you think about what I just said?
Yeah, no, I would say I mostly align with everything you said. The one thing that I think is there's discipline in garrison. The things that you need to be in, and it's almost like when you get over into combat zone, you exchange that set of disciplines for another set of disciplines. It's not the same. It's not the same focus on uniforms and shaves and all that sort of thing. But if you haven't built the muscle to be disciplined before, in the rear or on base, then you don't necessarily have the muscle to be disciplined in other areas. And that's where I think there's a direct correlation. Now, there are still those that could take it too far and just make it a giant pain in the ass. And as I think about, there's enough things about the military and Marine Corps life that could be a pain in the ass. You don't need to make more of them or invent new ones. But I do think when it comes to that, just understanding, and I think you said it well, like the leaders need to help the junior leaders and just the Marines understand why that's important, and just say, these are the standards we're holding ourselves to, and we need to all meet or exceed the standards. That's it. And I think that, that's not always explained either. It's just hey, first sergeant wants us to do this, and so we got to do it no matter what. And it's going to be a giant, cluster, but we're doing it because the first sergeant said. And that's where it's not, that doesn't do anybody any good. I think that same thing with a little bit of explanation and constant reminders of why that's important will do a lot more.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm going to use an example that I bet you lived, the classic Thursday night field day. Come hell or high water, those Marines are going to be in the bricks, as they call the barracks. They're going to empty the rooms out. And depending on who's in charge of it, the first sergeant or whatever, it could go from just clean your room.
Right. Make sure.
Clean it. And we will check. We're coming in. And then you've got the guys, and I've heard that, this guy was famous for unscrewing the shower drain and reaching a foot down, and if there was anything in there, it's like failed Saturday morning. Right. It's like, seriously?
Right.
What's the point? And so that breeds resentment toward discipline. It's like, we just got back from Iraq.
Yeah.
And you weren't with us, and now you're telling us this, and so it breeds a lot of resentment. And I have communicated with a lot of, I'm 69 years old now, so I've been retired from the Marine Corps 27 years. I missed, your wars, and I'm not sorry about it, to be honest with you, But I see, and it was like this in my day. It was the old guy saying, just shut up and do it. Shut up.
Right.
Just do it. And whenever you tell anybody, even civilians, shut up, do it because I said so, they will comply, but you'll never really get commitment from them. Why are we doing this? And I want to make sure, I was on a recent podcast where I touched upon this, and I said, I want to clarify this. I'm a proponent of garrison discipline, enforce the regs, no more, no less. But I can show you pictures of me in combat environments. Hadn't had a haircut, got 4 days growth on me because we were over. We had no time. Hands in the pockets. It's freezing like death. Camis ain't going to inspection anytime soon. Right. So you get it. But I do remember this anecdote when we went to Kuwait. For Desert Storm and all that, they burned the oil wells. The Iraqis burned the oil wells. So there's all this black smoke came upon us, man, and it dyed our camis. We had chocolate chip. It dyed them like grayish black. And we looked, I got pictures of me with all the oil on me. I looked like a like a brown-skinned Mexican, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like that, you couldn't really tell who we were. And I remember after the ceasefire, we went through the Iraqis, kind of like shit through a goose, it really wasn't Ramadi, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
For the most part. And I remember saying, all right, gents, we're here in a holding area. I don't know when we're going back to Saudi Arabia for our flights home. Listen, to the extent that we can, let's look like Marines again.
Yeah.
And what I was saying was, now I'm going to shave. And I'm going to I got a spare set of camis, so I'm going to put them on. And if they don't have the spare set, just wash them, get them as clean as possible, And that's what we did. But I was also aware, firsthand knowledge of some lesser disciplined units in garrison. They were lesser disciplined in combat. They were a problem for us in combat. And those were the guys that when we went back to Saudi Arabia 2 weeks later and stayed there for another 2 weeks after that before the flight, those guys were still living in filth. And then when they got back to the States, they were still so undisciplined units never change, and it's never good. And I did talk to a retired sergeant major who worked as a contractor in Iraq, and somehow he was for Marines, Marine incoming units, briefing him up. And he said, Mike, I saw some guys, to prove your point, I saw some units arrive in Iraq, and I thought they were leaving. They looked that bad. They looked like they'd been there 6 months and they just got there. They were late to the presentations. The NCOs weren't there. The officers didn't give a shit. And I'm telling you, those units did take, in my opinion, more casualties than they needed to because they were undisciplined. They were making tactical mistakes. The sentries were falling asleep. They just hadn't had that level of discipline instilled. So I'm going to shut up now and ask you your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things you said, like going back to like the field day inspections, when whatever it was, when you just say, you need to meet the standard, here's what it is. But when you go past it, it just turns off. There's a certain level of ambitious individual that joins the Marine Corps or any organization that you want on your side. You need to lead that person and lead them well. And that's the type of person that will just be, will say, okay, if this is how it's going to be after I just got back from Iraq or Afghanistan after 7 months, like I'm out. I'm doing my 4 years and I'm out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with this shit. But there's also a certain population, the ones who just say, just do it and shut up about it, that will stick around, and you don't want them to. Like, they're just happy to be, kind of brain dead, do whatever, go along, don't ask questions, don't think outside the box, just go, hey, they said we got to do this, we're going to do it. I don't care. I'm here. I'm getting a paycheck. And that's what matters. And so I think it's just so important that you execute to the level you need to, or you make sure everybody is executing that. And you look for areas where people need to excel, but it doesn't need to be in cleaning out the bottom, the bottom 2 feet of their shower drain. It's important things. And I think that's one of the things too, that we had a first sergeant at my reserve company, Alpha Company. His name was First Sergeant Baum, and he was one of the most he came from Arkansas, country backwoods types, but the guy is just a freaking rock, physically. Like, he, probably 6 foot tall, 200 pounds of just pure muscle, and could I would pick him to fight anybody in the battalion. But he had, every time we did field training, he had an award he would give out, and it was like Field Marine of the Month or something like that, where they looked for traits in Marines, like in the field, to say, okay, here, he didn't say it or explain it this way, but it was almost like, we have Marines who excel in garrison, and they know how to look good, and their camis are always good and everything. And a lot of that translates to being in the field, but not all of it. And so there are some people that excel spectacularly in garrison, some who excel in the field. Let's make sure we're recognizing both, because we need both types and we need to get everybody to work together. But sometimes I think if you're stuck in garrison for a long time and it's just around, hey, who's got the tightest roll in their sleeves, you're leaving a lot, or you're not recognizing the contributions of a lot of Marines who will save your ass when you're in combat. And they're the guys that, it's not completely mutually exclusive, but there's some of those people that you really need to make sure that you're fostering that and finding a way to help them, live in both worlds. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I'm going to make one more caveat, let you see what you think about it. I find that a lot of times these leaders, and I use that dubiously, or loosely, that these leaders that would inflict this, we're picking on the field day, but it's other stuff too.
Yeah, yep.
They don't want to be deemed as the weak guy.
Sure.
No.
Yeah.
Boy,
Yep.
First sergeant in Lima Company, he's a hard. I mean, that guy. You guys got it easy. This guy, and they all want to be that guy. And I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be a lead sled dog, so to speak, and lifted an officer. I wanted to be the guy that people looked at. Man, that guy's got his act together.
Yeah.
But I find that sometimes those are the guys that do that to puff their ego up. Yeah. And they start wanting to be like drill instructors.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And I, as you know, I was a drill instructor as an enlisted Marine. And I used to snatch those guys up and say, hey, come on over here. We don't talk to NCOs like that. We don't even talk to Marines like that. They've been through boot camp. That's the rite of passage.
Yeah. Yep.
If you want to be a drill instructor, let me know. We'll fill out an AA form. You can go to DI school, but I'm going to tell you that stuff you're making those guys do, you can't do that to recruits either.
Right.
So stop with the DI stuff. Oh, yeah. Roger that. And I've had to tell that to staff NCOs. Some of whom had been drill instructors. I'm like, dude, shut it off. Shut it off. I don't want Marines that we have to yell at. And incentive PT, like get on your face, get up, stand down. I said that will not happen in my company unless you agree that if you do something wrong, I'm going to do that to you in front of your troops. What do you think about that? And I said that to a whole bunch of staff NCOs one time in my company, and these were good guys. And I put so much trust in the staff NCOs and NCOs, like Marines will do. They took it up a level. Further than I wanted. And I saw what I saw. I'm like, are those my Marines for sure? Yes. Like incentive PT, like a Parasite. I'm like, give me all the officers and staff NCOs. Like, and I read them the Riot Act, and there was probably 6 or 7 former DIs in there. Good guys. You could see them put, and then when I said, I'll let you do it as long as I can do it to you.
Right.
And they just hung their head like, we got it, sir. And I just had to say something, never again. Yeah. It was coming from a good place, but there's one place for a DI run. Harris Island or MCRD San Diego. Or OCS. That's it. And if you can't take it off, or if you've never even been there and you're trying to put it on, beware of that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. I think because it's such a formative experience for Marines going through those things, like you can fall into that, some of that, and not everything that the drill instructors do is completely off limit, but like, it is, you're right. It's a rite of passage of time. I think one of the things that I really pushed against while I was in is just this mindset of like, I'm a senior Lance Corporal. I went to boot camp 6 months before you, so I'm completely more experienced, and like there's a certain amount of respect that goes with time and grade, and just time in the Marine Corps, because more likely you've done deployments, you've done that sort of thing, but it can be really get down to a level where it doesn't make any sense, and you've got these guys who taking on more authority than they have, and then acting like mini drill instructors. And it's one of the things that I think again forces a lot of good people out, or convinces them like, hey, this isn't the life for me. Either I don't aspire to get to that level and act like that, or I don't want to stay in if that's what I'm going to have to be subjected to. So I think I think that's a conversation that constantly needs to be brought to Marines. Like, hey, you're not at Paris Island, you're not at San Diego. Stop acting like that. And most of you weren't drill instructors, so stop acting like you were.
And I want to tell the folks that are listening to this and watching us, Ron, the reason why I'm dwelling on it and asking your opinion, and I knew what you were going to say without even asking you, is because this exists in spades in the Marine Corps. And if you are an officer or a staff NCO, do not assume, sit there and say, that's not happening in my unit. You have no idea what's happening in those bricks after 1700. You have no idea. And that's on you, because there's stuff going on there with the senior lance corporals and the boot drops, that make there's a level of hazing that makes the Russian army look like amateurs. It's like, oh my God, And so it's out there. Don't assume it's not in your units. And like anything else, it requires leadership to make sure it's not happening. And the S and BAMSIS, you got to supervise. You just can't, don't do it. You got to check. You got to send people down there. You know what I mean? I was a sergeant, and I was a drill instructor, and I didn't think, why do we have these two lieutenants? I'll tell you, I realized it later. I think if it wasn't for the presence of those officers, I think I could have gone too far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think I could have incentive PT'd recruits to the death. You know what I mean? I was so hyped up about the job and being the filter, the gatekeeper of the Marine Corps, that I needed somebody to remind me. Even their presence reminded me there are rules. That football field is this wide and that long. You go right up to the line. You step over that line, buddy, and you're in deep trouble. And I saw guys get court-martialed on the drill field and go to Leavenworth for doing stuff, like heinous stuff. Like, what do you think? Lighting a recruit on fire. I was trying to elicit discipline them by burning them.
There's other ways.
Exactly.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.